to another night in the archive. Tonight, we will be going through my collection of tales and narrative poetry. The Winter Carnival Under the Pier. By December, Wind Wharf felt like a town that had already packed itself away for the year. In summer, the little seaside place filled up with day trippers and weekenders. The boardwalk was loud, the beach was crowded, and the pier with its string of lights looked like a necklace laid out on the water. There were stalls selling fried dough and saltwater taffy, fortune teller tents, a small carousel that played off-key tunes, and a Ferris wheel that creaked and sighed over the bay. In winter, most of that shut down. The pier had been fenced off for 3 years now, ever since the accident. The boards at its entrance were nailed shut, the paint on the railing peeling, the lights taken down. A row of seagulls liked to sit on the locked gate, facing the town like a line of judges. The only shops open along the seafront were the bait store, the laundromat, and Hale's Cafe, a narrow place squeezed between a surf shop and a souvenir stall that had been closed since August. The cafe's windows steamed up from the inside, and if you wiped a clear circle with your sleeve, you'd see a few tables, a counter with a glass case of pastries, and a coffee machine that hissed like a tired dragon. Rowan Hale stood behind that counter, wiping down mugs for the second time, listening to the wind push at the door. There weren't many customers on a weekday afternoon in midwinter. An older man in a navy coat dozed in the corner with a half-finished cup of tea. 2 teenagers were in a booth by the window, sharing fries and a phone. A woman with a laptop tapped slowly at the keys, warming her hands on a mug of cocoa between sentences. Rowan's Aunt Mira moved between the tables, topping up water glasses and chatting with the regulars. She had a way of making small talk feel like something more important. People told her things at the counter they probably wouldn't have told their own families. "Refill?" she asked the man in the navy coat. He jolted awake. "Oh, yes, please. Thank you, Mira." Rowan watched, drying a mug that was already dry. The cafe was warm. It smelled like coffee and sugar, and the wind outside rattled the windows just enough to make staying inside feel like a decision. It should have been comforting. It was, mostly. But there was another feeling under it, a tightness across Rowan's shoulders that hadn't left since they'd come back to Wind Wharf 6 weeks ago. They'd grown up here in a small house a few streets up from the shore. Back then, the pier had been the center of everything. Birthday parties, first dates, fairs. The town's biggest event of the year was the Midsummer Lights Festival, a night in July when the pier was strung with lanterns, and everyone walked out over the water to watch the fireworks. There were food stalls and games and music, and every kid in town counted down to it as soon as school ended. Rowan had loved the festival. They'd also ruined it. They set the mug on the shelf a little harder than they meant to. It clinked against another and made Aunt Mira glance over from the tables. "You're going to break those just thinking about them too hard," she said, coming back behind the counter. Her dark hair was pulled up into its usual messy bun, and a pencil was tucked behind her ear. "Sorry," Rowan said. "You're not doing anything wrong," she added. "Just trying to scrub the past with a dishcloth again." Rowan half smiled. "Is it that obvious?" "You've been polishing the same mug for 5 minutes." She leaned an elbow on the counter, still thinking about the pier. Rowan didn't answer right away. They didn't have to. The pier sat in the corner of their mind, the way it sat at the end of the boardwalk. Shut off, cold, and impossible to ignore. 3 summers ago, when Rowan was 19 and full of ideas, the town council had let them help plan the Midsummer Lights Festival. They'd been flattered and eager and desperate to prove that they weren't just the quiet kid who liked drawing and hiding in the back of the art room. Their big idea had been a lantern release. Not just the usual little jars hung along the railings, but dozens of paper lanterns sent floating up into the sky at once, They'd seen videos of it online, glowing shapes rising together, drifting over the water like a new constellation. They designed the lanterns, helped assemble them, convinced people it would be safe. They tested 3 of them the week before in the field behind the school, and they'd risen beautifully, drifting away over the town. On the night of the festival, under the glow of strings of lights, surrounded by laughing people and old songs, they'd lit the lanterns and counted down and let go. Most of the lanterns went up, a few did not. One caught a cross-current of wind and drifted sideways instead of up. It snagged in the wiring of the Ferris wheel, the flame licking at the decorations and the old paint. For a second it seemed to go out. Then part of the wheel caught. The lights flickered. Someone shouted. The operator hit the emergency stop, but one of the seats jolted in the process. No one was seriously hurt, thank God, but a little boy bruised his head on the safety bar and threw up. People panicked. Someone started yelling about fire codes. The fire brigade came and soaked everything down, and the rest of the festival was canceled. Later, inspectors said the Ferris wheel was too old, the paint too flammable, the wiring too exposed. It would have needed replacing soon anyway. But everyone in town knew what had started it, a paper lantern that had no business being there. They closed the pier until further notice. Further notice never came. The landlord who owned most of the rides, a man who lived 3 towns over, decided it wasn't worth the trouble to fix things up. He took what he could, sold some of the machines, and left the rest to rust behind the fence. Rowan had not stayed long after that. They'd gotten a job in the city, doing graphic design for a small firm, and told themselves leaving was a fresh start. It felt more like running. Every time they thought about Windwharf, they saw the look on Mrs. Talley's face when Rowan had gone to apologize about her grandson, the one who'd vomited and screamed and refused to go near a ride since. They heard the conversation in the grocery store, whispered but not quietly enough, about that lantern idea, and kids who think they know better than the people who've lived here all their lives. Now Rowan was back, because the firm had downsized and let them go. And Aunt Mira had called and said simply, "If you need somewhere to land, I have a cafe that could use a pair of hands and a person who knows how to use a computer. Come home. You don't have to stay forever. Just come home for now." They'd said yes before they could talk themselves out of it. "Tonight's going to be a long one," Mira said now, pulling Rowan out of the memory. "Storms coming in. Wind like this, half the town will end up in here, avoiding their own kitchens." Rowan glanced toward the door. The sky beyond the window had darkened from gray to deep blue. The whitecaps on the bay were bigger. The gulls had abandoned the pier gate and were wheeling inland, screaming at each other. "Maybe they'll barricade themselves inside instead," Rowan said. "Either way, we'll be here," Mira replied. "Go take your break before the rush. Get some air before the air turns sideways." Rowan grabbed their coat from the hook by the back door and stepped outside. The cold slapped their cheeks awake. The alley behind the cafe led to a narrow lane that opened onto the seafront. Wind hit them like a solid thing when they reached the street. The boardwalk in winter always looked like it was waiting to start a show that had been canceled at the last minute. The empty stalls, the shuttered game booths, the faded posters and the locked glass displays. It all added up to an uncomfortable kind of silence. Rowan walked past them, hands in their pockets, pacing out a path they'd taken 100 times as a kid. At the end of the boardwalk, the pier's gate loomed. It was a tall metal thing with a padlock the size of a child's fist. A wooden sign, bleached by salt and time, still hung from it. "Pier closed. No entry." Someone had added a smaller sign beneath it in marker. "Seriously, no!" The gulls had left a generous number of splatters on both. Rowan stood there, collar pulled up. watching the waves smash into the pilings below. They could hear the hollow thump sound the water made when it hit the old support beams. In certain moods, it sounded like a heartbeat. In others, like knocking. They almost turned back right then. The wind was strong and their fingers were starting to ache, but something held them there, a stubbornness that had nothing to do with the cold. Still staring at it like it's going to apologize first? The voice came from their right. Rowan looked over. Mrs. Dawes, who owned the bait shop, stood in her doorway in an oversized sweater, smoking. Her hair was tucked under a wool hat, patterned with fish. "Hi, Mrs. Dawes," Rowan said. She squinted at them through the smoke. "Rowan, you're taller. I think I stopped growing before I left." "You walk taller then," she said, which could have been a compliment or a warning. "Got the city in your shoulders?" Rowan didn't know what to say to that, so they shrugged. "You can stop punishing yourself with that view," she added, jerking her chin at the gate. "We all blamed you more than we should have. Then the insurance report came back and made us feel stupid. Not everyone's caught up with that, but most of us have." "It was my idea," Rowan said. "Yeah," she replied. "It was also cheap wiring, a rusty wheel, and a landlord who didn't want to pay for maintenance. You lit the match in a room full of fumes is all." She flicked ash into a coffee can. "Doesn't mean you never get to touch a candle again." Rowan stared at the gray wood of the pier. "It feels like the town never really forgave me." "It feels like you never really asked," Mrs. Dawes said. "You left before we could decide." She checked the sky. "Storm's coming. Don't get knocked into the drink out here." She went back inside, leaving Rowan with the wind in the gate and the sound of the sea. They stepped closer to the fence, gloved hands curling around the cold metal. For a second, they wanted to rattle it, to see if they could shake loose the last 3 years. Instead, they listened. Between the rush of the wind and the crash of waves, there was another sound. A faint, tinny music. Rowan frowned. It wasn't the wind through ropes or the usual creaking of wood. It sounded like calliope? Not quite. A melody played on pipes, high and bright. It was impossible. There was nothing on the pier anymore that could make that sound. Rowan leaned in. The music grew a little louder, still distant, like something playing at the bottom of a pool. "Okay," they said out loud. "Either I'm losing it, or there's a ghost carnival under the pier." The idea was ridiculous, which usually meant in Windwharf it was only partly wrong. They stepped back and looked around. No one else was close enough to hear it. The storm was keeping people indoors. The only witnesses were a trash can on its side and a stray cat sheltering under a bench. The music seemed to be coming from beneath the pier, not from above it. From the area where the pilings met the sand and stone. Rowan glanced down the stairs that led from the boardwalk to the beach. The tide was coming in, waves slapping at the lower steps. Not a good time for a walk under the pier. But the music pulled at them, insistent. Mira had told them to get some air. She hadn't said how. Rowan went down the stairs, gripping the railing as a gust shoved at their back. At the bottom, cold foam rushed over their boots. The beach was narrow at high tide, a strip of wet sand and stone between the water and the boardwalk's support beams. Under the pier, shadows were deeper. The pilings marched out into the sea like a row of uneven legs. Old seaweed clung to them, and barnacles made crusty collars around the bases. The smell was strong, salt, rot, and something metallic. The music was clearer down here. A looping tune, slightly off, like something on an old record player. It came from farther in, toward the dark. "This is how people die in horror movies," Rowan muttered. "Good thing this is just a weird seaside town and not a horror movie." They picked their way between the pilings, staying as far from the water as they could. Waves washed in and out, soaking their boots. The wind's roar turned into a low whistle, trapped by the beams. The source of the music revealed itself in pieces. First, a flicker of color that wasn't from the stormy sky or the gray water, something like the reflection of lights. Then, a shape that shouldn't be there beyond the last row of pilings. A dark opening in the rock wall at the end of the pier, where the town's cliff dropped into the sea. At first, Rowan thought it was just an old storm drain or a cave mouth. But the closer they got, the more wrong it looked. The opening wasn't ragged like a natural cave. It was smooth around the edges, as if someone had cut a doorway into the stone. There were carvings around it too, worn down but still visible. Swirls, stars, and little half-formed faces. Inside, in the dimness, there was light. Not daylight, not firelight. Something softer and stranger, like the glow from an old amusement park after closing. The music leaked out, the tune looping, inviting. A wave surged around their ankles, almost knocking them sideways. Rowan grabbed a piling and swore. "Fine," they said to the cave. "If I get pneumonia, this is on you." They waited for a gap in the waves, then darted the last few steps and ducked through the opening. Inside, the sound of the wind dropped away, as if someone had closed a door. The smell of salted seaweed faded, replaced by something else. Sugar, old wood, and the faint tang of metal and oil. They straightened up slowly. They were standing on wooden planks, not rough, worn boards like the underside of the pier, but smooth, painted planks that clicked lightly under their boots. Ahead of them stretched a corridor lined with string lights, real bulbs, warm and golden, hanging in swoops from posts. They ran off into a space that couldn't possibly fit under the pier, and yet here it was, an entire carnival, compacted and tucked beneath the town like a secret. There was a carousel, a Ferris wheel, stalls with striped awnings, game booths stacked with prizes. A sway-backed roller coaster curled around in a tight loop. Overhead, instead of a ceiling or sky, there was a dark, shimmering surface that moved like water, and under it, like reflections, faint shapes drifted past. Things that looked disturbingly like boats and fish, but also like lanterns and fireworks and faces. The place glowed with its own light. It looked like every seaside fair Rowan had ever seen, painted with more color than the real world usually allowed. There was no one there. "Okay," Rowan said. Their voice echoed lightly, as if the space were larger than it looked. "This is definitely not in the tourist brochure." They stepped forward cautiously. The lights hummed. The music came from a small calliope on a wagon near the carousel, its keys pressed down with no visible hand. "Hello?" Rowan called. "Is anybody—" "Late," said a voice directly behind them. They spun around. A figure stood near the entrance, leaning against one of the posts. At first glance, Rowan thought it was a person in a costume. The figure wore a coat like a ringmaster, deep blue with silver buttons, and a top hat that had seen better days. Their face was pale, their eyes dark and bright at once. But the longer Rowan looked, the more wrong they seemed. Their skin had a faint sheen like porcelain. Their hair moved slightly as if underwater, even though the air was still. "You're late," the figure repeated. Their voice was smooth, with an accent from nowhere in particular. I was starting to think the invitation had gone astray. "I didn't get an invitation," Rowan said, heart thumping. "I heard music." The figure tilted their head. "Oh, that is the invitation." They pushed off the post and stepped closer, boots clicking on the planks without leaving scuffs. "Rowan Hale, yes?" they said. Rowan's mouth went dry. "How do you know my name?" The figure smiled. "We keep lists. You might say we run on them." They swept a hand out, indicating the carnival. Welcome to the Midwinter Pavilion, or more simply, the Winter Carnival under the pier. We house abandoned festivals, misfired celebrations, and half-forgotten holidays from towns that can't quite bear the look at. Windwharf, I'm afraid, has qualified. Rowan stared. You're telling me this is where... what? Bad parties go to die? Not die, the figure said. They linger. They repeat. They replay themselves in case someone comes looking, which no one usually does. They stuck out a hand. I'm Maris, curator, keeper of lost nights, and occasionally guide. On very special occasions, of course. Rowan didn't take the hand. Is this some kind of illusion? Dream? Am I unconscious on the beach right now? Maris shrugged. Possibly. Does it matter if the work still needs doing? What work? Maris's smile faded. You made a mess up there, they said, jerking their chin vaguely toward the direction of the town. And then you left. The Midsummer Lights Festival, was it? Rowan flinched. I didn't mean to... No one ever does, Maris said lightly. Intention is rarely the problem. The pier was already rotting. The landlord was cheap. People blamed you because you had the most obvious idea and the clearest face to attach it to. But the night itself didn't vanish. It slipped. They gestured at the carnival. It fell in here. Rowan looked around. The carousel horses moved slightly as if breathing. The Ferris wheel creaked empty, its seats swaying minutely. The game booth's targets reset themselves over and over. We caught it, Maris said. That's what we do. We catch stray knights before they break apart completely. We keep them safe, down where the tide and time can't gnaw on them. But it's not ideal. A festival is meant to belong to people, not to a basement. So the whole Midsummer Lights Festival is... Rowan swallowed. It's down here? To a degree, Maris said. Bits of it. The part that no one above could face properly. The regret, the embarrassment, the what-ifs. They seeped down through the cracks, and we gave them something to attach to. They turned, coat swirling. Come on, I'll show you. Rowan followed because there wasn't much else to do. Maris led them past the carousel, where the painted horses watched with glass eyes that seemed almost interested. Past a ring-toss stall where the rings floated themselves onto the pegs, missed once, twice, hit on the third try, and then reset. At the far side of the carnival, through a striped archway, was a smaller space. Lanterns hung in the air here, drifting slowly, each containing not a candle, but a moving scene. Rowan stepped closer to one. Inside, in miniature, they saw a stretch of the pier, lit with strings of bulbs, people walking, laughing, holding paper cups and paper plates. Kids ran ahead. Music played, faint, like it was coming from the bottom of a glass. They recognized the clothes, the backdrop, the arrangement of the stalls. That's the night, they whispered. In slices, Maris said. Frozen at the moment before things went wrong, or after, or right in the middle, depending on which lantern you look at. Rowan turned to another. Inside that one, they saw themselves, 3 years younger, standing with a bundle of paper lanterns, talking fast to a group of volunteers. Their hands moved in the air, explaining. Their face was bright and nervous. They moved to a third lantern. In this one, the Ferris wheel loomed, its lights flickering. People pointed, someone shouted. Smoke curled in the miniature scene, then froze, never spreading. It replays, Maris said, on a loop, every night. Because up there, they jerked their head toward the town again. No one properly finished it. No one really grieved the loss of the pier. No one forgave you. Not really. And you certainly didn't forgive yourself. So the night has nowhere to go. It stayed open, and open things leak. That's why you opened the door? Rowan asked. Because I came back to town? Because you came back, Maris said. And because you walked down to the gate instead of pretending the pier didn't exist. Because you stood there long enough for the carnival to notice that for once, you weren't running away. There was no accusation in their tone. That almost made it worse. What do you want from me? Rowan asked. If you're some kind of keeper of lost festivals, what am I supposed to do about it? Maris tapped one lantern gently. The scene inside rippled. We keep what we're given, they said, but we can't let it pile up forever. We're under a lot of towns, you know. People mess up celebrations all the time. They forget each other's birthdays, ruin weddings, cancel parades, fight at Christmas dinners. We have limited shelf space. They turned to face Rowan fully. Your town's Midsummer Lights Festival could stay here forever, looping in a corner, turning over the same embarrassment and regret until it wears thin. Or you could help us send it back where it belongs. How? Rowan asked. Maris glanced around, then started walking again. We do a reversal, they said. We run the festival down here one more time, properly, with the person who broke it taking responsibility for the night instead of hiding from it. You own what you did. You accept that the pier was part your fault and part not. You decide, very clearly, whether you want your town to have that night back. And if that's strong enough, the carnival lets go. The images go up instead of down. The next time your town tries to celebrate something, it'll have room for the old festival to live in memory, instead of sitting in our basement. And if it's not strong enough, Rowan asked. Maris shrugged. Then you go home and keep serving coffee, I suppose. The pier stays closed. Maybe over time, your town stops putting much effort into summer at all. People start to say, we used to have such a nice festival. And then they stop saying that and just remember vaguely that things were nicer once. The carnival keeps spinning. The lanterns keep looping. You try to pretend you never saw it. Rowan looked at the lantern with their younger self inside. 19-year-old Rowan was frozen with their mouth open mid-sentence, eyes bright, unaware of everything that was about to happen. What does run the festival down here even mean? They asked. Maris's eyes gleamed. It means we turn this place on for real, not just echoes. We let the rides move. We let the games play. We let the music change. And we let you be in it. Properly, this time, instead of watching from outside. We see what you do with it when there's no one else to blame. Rowan swallowed. And if I mess up again, then you mess up again, Maris said simply. But this time you'll be awake for it. That makes a difference. They clapped their hands once. The sound echoed strangely, bouncing off unseen walls. Carnival's opening, they said. You coming, or do I tell the lanterns you decided the past is more comfortable than the present? Rowan took a breath. The air tasted like sugar and salt and metal. They thought about Aunt Mira, the way she'd looked at them when she'd said, come home. They thought about Mrs. Dawes saying the town hadn't finished deciding whether to forgive them. They thought about how it had felt to stand in front of the pier gate, listening to music no one else could hear. I'm coming, they said. Maris grinned. Excellent. Let's begin. They led Rowan back out into the main carnival. As they walked, the lights brightened. The Calliope's tune shifted, becoming fuller, less like a broken record, and more like a real song. The carousel horses lifted their heads and shook their manes. The Ferris wheel shuddered, then turned a fraction. I thought no one came down here, Rowan said. They don't, Maris said. Not usually. But ghosts of nights are patient. They'll perform for an audience of one, if they have to. Ribbons of color unfurled from nowhere, hanging in the air like streamers. Stalls that had been dim flicked on their bulbs. A stall selling fake cotton candy made of light puffed itself into existence beside the ring toss. "Right," Maris said, turning to Rowan. "Here's how this works. Think about the Midsummer Lights Festival as it should have gone. All of it. The good parts, the boring parts, the embarrassing but fixable parts. Not the disaster itself. Think of the version that could have happened if the wheel hadn't caught, if people had argued and made up and gone home happy tired. That's the template. The pavilion can work with that." Rowan closed their eyes. It was like trying to imagine a photograph that had never been taken. They pictured the pier strung with lanterns, their designs glowing. They pictured kids with sticky hands running in circles. They pictured their parents leaning against the railing, holding cups of coffee from Mira's cafe. They pictured Mrs. Talley's grandson tugging on his grandma's sleeve, begging for one more ride on the carousel. They pictured themselves not as the center of it all, but as someone moving through it, checking on the stalls, laughing, adjusting a lantern here and there, being part of it instead of directing it. They felt something shift around them. When they opened their eyes, the carnival had changed. It was fuller. The air seemed denser. Faint figures moved at the edges of their vision, blurs of color and shape that were not quite solid, not quite nothing. The rides turned more smoothly. The music settled into a rhythm that sounded oddly familiar. Rowan realized what tune the calliope was playing. It was the same one the local band used to play on festival nights, the one their dad used to hum while doing the dishes. "Good," Maris said softly. "Now here's your part. Walk it. On your own 2 feet. No watching from the railings. Talk, even if there's no one to answer. Do what you wish you'd done that night. Say what you wish you'd said. The pavilion will listen. It always does." Rowan started with the carousel. The horses here were more ornate than the ones that had been on the real pier, but there was something familiar in their eyes. The platform spun slowly, empty. They reached out and touched the nearest horse's neck. It was cool and smooth. "I'm sorry," they said quietly. "You got blamed for something that wasn't all your fault, too. You just wanted to go around in circles. You didn't ask to be set on fire." The horse snorted. It was a tiny sound, almost imaginary, but it made Rowan smile despite themselves. They walked past the game booth. At the ring toss, they picked up a ring and tried, even though there was no one behind the counter to take their tickets. The ring landed neatly over a peg on the second try. "At least something works the way it should," they muttered. At the shooting gallery, they picked up a toy rifle and fired at a row of tin ducks. The rifle made almost no sound. The ducks rattled and dropped one after another. At each stall, they talked. They apologized. Not in dramatic speeches, but in simple sentences they'd never had the nerve to say out loud. "I shouldn't have pushed so hard. I wanted people to think I could do something big. I should have listened when you said the wind was changing. I was too proud to admit I'd misjudged it." The faint shapes around them thickened. At one point, Rowan thought they recognized their father's silhouette by the carousel rail. When they blinked, the shape was gone, or somewhere else, or maybe it had never been separate from the lights in the first place. Eventually, they reached the lantern arch again. Maris was there, watching. "You're doing well," they said. "It doesn't feel like enough," Rowan said. "It rarely does," Maris said. "But the pavilion doesn't require perfection, just honesty." Rowan looked up. Above the carnival, that shimmering surface still moved, dark and restless. If they squinted, they could see shapes pressing against it. Hints of buildings, streets, people walking in winter coats. Windward, upside down. "What happens if this works?" Rowan asked. "Will the pier suddenly be repaired? Will the wheel come back?" Maris shook their head. No, rusted metal doesn't unrust just because the past is tidied up. The pier may always stay closed, or your town might eventually decide to fix it. That part is up to them. What changes is the weight of the festival. Right now it's down here, looping endlessly. If we send it back, it will become something softer, a story, rather than a wound. You make it sound small, Rowan said. Stories aren't small, Maris replied. Wounds just shout louder. They held out their hand. On their palm lay a small paper lantern. It was blank, no design on its sides. You get one more, they said. Just one this time. No elaborate release, no gimmicks. One lantern, one intention. That's all the pavilion will let you take up. Rowan took it carefully. The paper was thin, but strong. What do I do with it, they asked. Light it here, Maris said. Then carry it back through the door. Take it to the pier gate. Let the town see you holding it. Say what you need to say. If they see you stand there and not run, if they hear you accept your part and forgive yourself at the same time, the lantern will know where to go. That sounds vague, Rowan said. Magic usually is, from the outside, Maris replied. From the inside, it's mostly just doing the difficult thing in the simplest way possible. They snapped their fingers. A small flame appeared in the air, hovering. It drifted to the lantern in Rowan's hands and kissed the wick. The lantern's sides glowed gently. Go, Maris said, before the tide changes. Rowan hesitated. Will I be able to come back here? Maris smiled, smaller this time. I don't know, they said. We move around. We answer to more than one shoreline. But if you do your part up there, you won't need us in the same way. That's a good thing. Rowan nodded. They held the lantern carefully and walked back toward the cave entrance. As they reached the opening, they glanced back. The carnival was dimmer now, like a photo fading at the edges. The rides still turned, but more slowly. The lanterns with scenes inside them flickered. Maris raised a hand in a half salute. Happy Midsummer, they called, even though outside it was winter. Rowan stepped through the doorway into the cold. The wind hit them immediately, sharp and loud. The storm had come closer while they were below. The clouds were lower and darker, and the bay was a mass of white-tipped waves. Their boots splashed through seawater as they hurried back along the beach, one hand shielding the lantern's flame. It should have gone out. It didn't. The glass side stayed warm and dry. By the time Rowan reached the boardwalk steps, their legs ached and their nose was numb. They climbed back up to street level, breath steaming. The seafront was busier now. Word of the approaching storm had sent people out early to run errands. A group of teenagers clustered outside the convenience store. Mrs. Dawes was dragging a display stand inside her bait shop. A couple walked by with a dog that hated the wind and made its displeasure known with every other step. They all stared when they saw Rowan coming up from the beach with a lit paper lantern in their hands. Rowan's first instinct was to duck down a side street, to hide the lantern, to pretend it was for some private thing. They forced themselves to walk straight to the pier gate instead. The gate loomed, dark and rusted. The sign with pier closed flapped a little. Rowan stood in front of it, the lantern held at chest height. People slowed, stopped. A small circle formed behind them without anyone quite meaning to form a circle. Aunt Mira emerged from the cafe, wiping her hands on her apron, eyes narrowing in confusion. Rowan took a breath. The air tasted like salt and coming rain. This is going to sound strange, they said, louder than they thought they could. But please, just let me say it. The conversations around them quieted. The only sound for a moment was the wind. 3 summers ago, Rowan said, I had an idea for the Midsummer Lights Festival. I wanted to make it bigger, brighter, more like the things I'd seen in other places. wanted to prove I could do something important. I didn't think enough about the old pier, or the wind, or the fact that people liked the festival the way it was. They looked at their boots for a second, then back up. When the lantern hit the wheel and everything went wrong, I panicked. I said sorry to some of you, but then I left. I told myself it was for work, but it was because I couldn't stand looking at this gate and knowing you all knew it was my idea that started it. The lantern's flame danced, steady. The inspector said it wasn't just my fault, Rowan went on. That the wheel was unsafe, that the landlord cut corners. But I let that be an excuse to stop talking about it. I acted like if I went away, the mistake would go away too. It didn't. It got stuck here. The festival got stuck here. And we've all been walking around it like it's a hole in the floor we're pretending not to see. Mira's face was soft and worried. Mrs. Dawes had stopped in her doorway, arms folded, expression unreadable. The teenagers outside the shop looked more interested than mocking. "I'm tired of pretending the pier isn't there," Rowan said. "I'm tired of you all having to pretend it doesn't bother you that our best summer night just vanished. I'm sorry for my part in that. Really sorry. Not just I hope this blows over sorry. I understand now that wanting to impress people isn't a good enough reason to change something everyone shares." They swallowed. "But I also don't want us to keep living like the night never happened. It did. Parts of it were good. Parts of it weren't. I'd rather remember all of it together than keep pretending it's too embarrassing to talk about." They took a breath and turned to the gate. "This was my idea," they said to it. "I'm not going to hide from it anymore. If you ever open again, I'll help fix you. If you don't, I'll stop acting like that night stole something from my life that can never be replaced. We can make new nights. We can tell the story properly instead of letting it hang over us." The lantern in their hands grew warmer. The paper glowed brighter, as if someone had turned up a switch inside it. Rowan stepped closer to the gate. There was a gap at the bottom, a few inches between the metal bar and the boards. They crouched and slid the lantern under the gate onto the first slat of the pier. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the lantern rose. It lifted off the boards as if held by water, not air. It floated up to the height of the gate, then above it. People gasped. It drifted toward the town, then hesitated, turning slowly. Instead of floating out over the bay, it went up. Rowan watched, mouth open, as the lantern rose past the streetlight, past the rooftops, into the low clouds. The flame inside didn't gutter. The paper didn't burn. It mounted into the gray and vanished. Someone exhaled hard. Rowan realized it was themselves. "Did anyone else see that?" one of the teenagers asked. "You're not that special," Mrs. Dawes said. "We all saw it." Mira moved closer to Rowan and put a hand on their arm. "That was a good speech," she said softly. "Horribly timed, with a storm coming, but good." Rowan let out a shaky laugh. "I don't know if it fixes anything," they said. "It fixes this," Mrs. Dawes called out, stepping forward. She jabbed a mittened thumb at the space between them. "We didn't get to hear you say any of that before you ran off. We deserve to hear it. You deserve to say it. That's worth something." A few people nodded. Someone in the back clapped once, tentatively like a test. Someone else joined, louder. Within a few seconds, the clapping spread. It wasn't thunderous. It didn't echo off the buildings, but it was real. Rowan's face burned. They ducked their head. Mira squeezed their arm. "All right," the mayor's voice said, somewhere on Rowan's left. "Now that we've had our impromptu airing of grievances and apologies on the seafront, who wants to talk about what we do next year?" There was a ripple of surprise. "Next year?" someone asked. "Yes," the mayor said. "We can't open the pier overnight, but we can't keep pretending summer doesn't happen either. We've been moping for 3 years. I think we've hit our quota." People laughed. "We could do the lantern walk along the promenade instead," someone suggested. "No Ferris wheel, no fire hazard. Project old photos of the pier on the seawall," another person added. "So the kids know what it used to look like." "Rowan can help design it," Mira said, loudly enough to cut through the suggestions. Every head turned toward them again. Rowan's stomach flipped. If you want me to," they said. I'd like to, if you'll have me." "We'll decide as a committee," the mayor said. "But as far as I'm concerned, if you're brave enough to stand in a storm and own your mess in front of half the town, you're brave enough to sit at a planning table." The first fat drops of rain started to fall, splatting on coats and hats. "Okay," Mira clapped her hands once. "Apologies done. Lantern miracle observed. The weather has opinions. Back to the cafe. I'll put extra cinnamon in the cocoa if everyone stops standing in the road." People started to move, shaking off the moment with the familiar bustle of going indoors. As they drifted away, Rowan glanced out at the pier one more time. For a second, they thought they saw something impossible. Far out where the boards disappeared into the mist, a faint line of lights hung in the air, like the old festival bulbs, like lanterns. They flickered, then dissolved into gray. Beneath their feet, deep under the sand and stone and water, the midwinter pavilion shifted. Lanterns under its striped arch dimmed, one by one. The images inside them, of the old festival, of smoke and shouting, of a 19-year-old with arms full of paper, bled into the air like ink in water, then rose, drawn upward. The carousel slowed, then stilled. The Ferris wheel came to a stop with a soft, satisfied sigh. Maris stood by the entrance, watching the scenes drift toward the shimmering ceiling. "Off you go," they said quietly. "Back where you belong. Try not to hit anything flammable this time." The images passed through the dark surface overhead and were gone. For the first time in years, the space under the pier felt less crowded. There were still other stalls, other rides, other nights stored in the midwinter pavilion. But the corner that had held Windwarf's Midsummer Lights Festival was empty now, ready for the next thing that needed keeping. Or maybe it would stay vacant for a while. Even carnivals needed rest. Maris adjusted their hat, the gesture more habit than necessity. "On to the next town," they said to no one in particular. Back in Windwarf, life didn't change overnight. The pier stayed closed for the rest of that winter and the one after. It needed more than apologies to fix its rot. But people stopped crossing the street to avoid walking past the gate. Parents told their kids stories about the Midsummer Lights Festival, complete with the part where things went wrong and the part where someone made a mistake and made it right later. The story became something people could tell without wincing. In the spring, Rowan sat at the planning table in the town hall with a notebook and a pencil, listening while people argued cheerfully about ideas for a new summer event. When someone suggested paper lanterns again, there was a silence, then a round of snorts. "Not over the water," Rowan said, "but maybe up on the bluff, with very long strings, and a fire truck on standby." They were half joking. The others laughed. "Maybe," the mayor said. "We'll see. No rush. We've got time to do it properly." Rowan walked home that day along the seafront, the wind crisp and sharp. They paused by the pier gate out of habit. The gate looked the same, but the tightness in their chest when they saw it was gone. In its place was something else. Not pride exactly, not yet, but not shame either. Something more like recognition. "You're part of my story," they said quietly to the wood and metal. "Not the whole thing." The sea thumped and knocked against the pilings below. It sounded, just for a heartbeat, like distant music. Rowan smiled and turned back toward the cafe, where lights and voices warmed the windows, and where for the first time in a long time they felt like they were walking into a place they belonged. The Lantern Snow Festival. By early winter, Evermarsh never really went dark. The snow helped with that. It lay in layers across roofs and stone steps, catching every bit of light and tossing it back. Firelight from windows turned the streets into a row of small stages. Even the river, slow and heavy under its first skin of ice, carried reflections from the town lights and stretched them into long, golden threads. The people of Evermarsh had built their lives around that river, and around one particular night each year, Festival of Lantern Snow. On that night, every house was expected to send at least one lantern down to the water. Some were simple jars with candles inside. Some were intricate wood and paper constructions that folded like flowers. Families painted scenes on them, houses, faces, wishful images of warmer days. The lanterns were set on flat wooden bases and pushed out with long poles. They drifted in a slow line along the river, candles trembling in the still air. The festival was old, older than the town hall and the new bridge and the clock on the church. People said it had begun as a way to welcome the winter guest, a mysterious figure who would walk the river's edge on the first big snowfall, checking whether the town was ready for the season. No one agreed on what the guest looked like. Children imagined a cloaked traveler with frost in their hair. Older people claimed it was just a story to keep people from ignoring the night. Old story or not, the tradition stuck. The lanterns floated every winter. Sometimes the snow did begin in the middle of the festival, light and steady, like a nod from the sky. When that happened, people said the guest had passed through Evermarsh in a good mood. For as long as Rhea Calder could remember, she had watched the festival from the edge of the crowd. Her parents had owned a stall on Market Row, selling jams and pickles, and their lanterns had always been practical. A sturdy jar with the shop name painted on it, a strong candle, nothing fancy. Rhea had wanted more color, more drama, more magic. She'd wanted fireworks in the snow, shapes in the sky, something that made Evermarsh feel like big cities in the travel magazines stacked on the library table. She grew up and left town for several years, studying event planning in a larger city by the coast. When she came back, Evermarsh looked smaller, but the river was the same, and the snow was the same, and the Festival of Lantern Snow was still the biggest thing in the year. That winter, the mayor called her into the town office, a cramped room above the bakery. The air smelled like cinnamon and paper. "You know we've been handling the festival the same way for decades," the mayor said, shuffling some notes. "The same lantern stands, the same music, the same cocoa stall. People love it, but..." She hesitated. "The truth is, fewer people come back to Evermarsh every year. Your generation leaves and doesn't return. We want to show them this town can grow forward. So we thought..." She slid a folder across the desk. "We thought maybe it's time to let someone with fresh ideas run it." Inside the folder, Rhea saw a printed schedule, a budget, and at the bottom, Festival Coordinator, Rhea Calder. Her heart jumped. This was the kind of job she'd imagined when she'd been in school, trying not to fall asleep over lighting diagrams and budget spreadsheets. Her first reaction was joy. Her second was fear. "What if they don't like what I do with it?" she asked. "If anyone complains, they can run it next year," the mayor said dryly. Then her expression softened. "Rhea, everyone knows you've worked hard for this. We trust you. Just remember what the festival is for." "To welcome the winter guest," Rhea said automatically. "And to make everyone feel like they're a part of something," the mayor added. "Don't forget that part while you're making your lists." Rhea didn't plan to forget. She simply thought that for people to feel part of something, that something had to be impressive, bigger, brighter, different. She spent the first week walking the town, taking notes. The old wooden lantern stands with chipped paint and uneven legs. The small stage near the riverbank where the same trio of fiddlers had played the same tunes every year. The hot cocoa stall with hand-lettered signs, cheerful but plain. The long line of candles bobbing down the river like simple stars. It's charming, she told herself, standing on the bridge one evening. Charming doesn't make people get on trains to come back. She sent away for catalogs. She wrote letters to vendors in the city. She emailed a contact from her event planning days, a woman who specialized in seasonal atmospheric enhancements. That phrase alone made Rhea feel more professional. In the back of an old trunk in her parents' attic, she also found something she hadn't been looking for, a slim book with a cover of faded blue leather. There was no title on the spine. Inside, the pages were filled with neat, looping handwriting, a mixture of recipes, notes, and odd instructions. Spring rain, 3 cups, river water, 7 mint leaves, stir counterclockwise, whisper twice, we're ready. Summer breeze, open windows, shake clean linens, call 3 children to shout down the lane. Winter glow, light all candles at once. Tucked between those lines, there were other stranger entries. Lights not from fire, for special occasions. Collect mist from river at dawn. Hang over lanterns. Ask sky to remember the sea of the stars. Rhea smiled. Her grandmother had kept this book. She remembered sitting at the table as a child, listening to her grandmother mutter things over pots on the stove. She hadn't realized she'd been saving the muttering. Old-fashioned event planning, Rhea murmured, tracing the ink with one finger. She paused at a page near the end. Snow that falls when you ask. For festivals, must be used carefully, only when hearts are together. Below that, in smaller writing, was a note. If hearts are not together, do not attempt. Snow will fall in the wrong places. There was a set of instructions involving chalk, a circle, a key made of ice. Rhea skimmed them, her attention snagging more on the title than the warning. Snow that falls when you ask, she said under her breath, looking out the attic window at the bare gray sky. Now that would impress people. Over the next days, her plans grew more ambitious. She would keep the river lanterns. Those were the soul of the festival. But she would add overhead lights, hanging in invisible lines above the square. She would bring in musicians from the capital. She would replace the old lantern stands with sleek new metal rails that could hold twice as many at once. She ordered boxes of glass orbs that, with the right spell, could glow without candles. She practiced the lights not from fire instructions in her grandmother's book, careful at first. It took her 3 tries to get one orb to float at head height and emit a steady, soft light. When it finally worked, she laughed out loud in her kitchen. The orb hovered over her table, shining like a captured piece of dawn. She told no one about this part of her planning. The budget on her official paper was still within what the town council had approved. The catalogs and spell book lived in a drawer under her bed. The day before the festival, the town was buzzing in the familiar way. People dug out their lanterns and discovered how old some of them were. They painted new designs over old chipped ones. They bought candles, string, paper, and cinnamon. Children practiced carrying lanterns without dropping them. The air on Market Row smelled like pine, sugar, and the bite of cold metal. Rhea moved among them with her clipboard, reminding herself that everything was under control. She had arranged for workers from the next town to come help set up the new overhead lights. She had practiced the snow spell twice, late at night by the river, in very small doses. A brief flurry around an empty field, flakes that vanished when they hit the ground. Nothing went wrong. Still, when she stood alone on the riverbank that evening, looking at the bare sky, she heard the Frost Queen in her memory, or someone like that, asking, "What did you think Christmas needed from you?" She shook the thought off. This was not like stealing from a hidden realm. She was improving a town event, helping, not taking. On the morning of the festival, Evermarsh woke to a gray sky and still air. No snow yet. Rhea checked weather reports from nearby towns. Snow was coming, they said, but slowly. Maybe not until late the next day. "It will be too late," she muttered. "The guest will miss us." By mid-afternoon, everything was in place. The new metal lantern rails lined the riverbank like silver ribs. Above the square, hidden lines strung from building to building held hundreds of glass orbs. They were dark for now, waiting. The cocoa stall had been expanded and painted with neat white letters. The musicians from the capital had arrived, wrapped in long scarves, carrying their instruments in black cases. Rhea stood at the edge of the square, taking it all in. It looked impressive. Bigger, brighter, different. "You've outdone yourself," the mayor said, coming up beside her. "I hope so," Rhea said. "I want people to remember this one." "They will," the mayor said, "one way or another." As the sun sank and the sky turned from gray to navy, people started arriving. They came in thick coats, boots crunching, lanterns cradled in mittened hands. Children ran ahead of their parents, shouting greetings to friends. Old ladies walked together in groups, leaning on each other's arms. The river's edge filled slowly with people. Rhea felt her heart rate climbing. She checked her watch, then the packet of notes in her pocket. The plan was precise. First, the lanterns would be lit and sent down the river. Then the musicians would start. Then she would step aside into the alley and perform the snow spell quietly, out of sight. The snow would fall as the procession of lanterns reached the middle of town, and at the same time, the glass orbs overhead would light up with soft, moving colors. The entire square would glow. People would gasp. They would talk about it for years. She watched as the first lanterns were placed in the water. Flames flickered, caught, steady. The current was slow, carrying the lights in a gentle line. Children waved and called, as if the lanterns were boats returning from long journeys instead of starting them. Rhea moved to the alley beside the baker's shop. This was where she had drawn her chalk circle earlier, hidden behind stacked crates and a pile of firewood. The circle was faint now, but she could still see it. At its center lay a shallow dish of water with a thin skin of ice, and on top of the ice, the small iron key she'd left there, already frosted. She'd followed the instructions in the spell book exactly. Sunrise water, 3 breaths on the key, the right words. Her hands shook as she took her place. She could hear the murmur of the crowd, the crackle of torches at the river's edge, the first notes of a tune from the musicians. She took a breath and began. "Winter, we're ready," she whispered as the spell required. "Come down and see." Nothing happened at first. The air around her felt unremarkable. She frowned, wondering if she'd made a mistake with the chalk or the water. She repeated the words a little louder. There was a soft sound, like a sigh, near her shoulder. She turned, startled, but no one was there. The alley remained empty, the stacked crates and barrels unchanged. And yet, something shifted. The air across her skin felt aware. "Snow that falls when you ask," she whispered, finishing the spell phrase. Above the square, the first flake appeared. It came out of a clear patch of sky, small and bright. A child pointed up at it, shouting. Another flake followed, then another. Within seconds, a thin curtain of snow was drifting down over the square. The crowd cheered. People tilted their faces up. A few laughed. The musicians missed a beat, and then recovered, weaving the surprise into their tune. Rhea smiled. relief flooding through her. It was working. She stepped out of the alley to watch, her heart pounding pleasantly now. The snow thickened. It fell in straight, soft lines, floating down between the buildings. The flakes were fine and dry, perfect festival snow. They caught in people's hair and lashes, in the pine branches over the doors. The lanterns on the river continued their slow journey, their flames flickering but not going out. "Beautiful," someone near Rhea said. "Like a painting," said another. Rhea glanced up at the glass orbs above the square. It was time for the second part. She went to the control box hidden near the stage, a simple wooden panel with 3 switches she'd wired herself. The spell book had said the orbs would respond to a spark and a word. She flipped the first switch and whispered, "Glow." Nothing for a moment. Then, one by one, the orbs lit. They didn't all come on at once the way she imagined. Instead, they lit in a ripple, starting from the center of the square and moving outwards like pebbles dropped in water. Each orb filled with a soft, pale light. The snow caught the glow and turned it into a faint mist. People gasped and clapped. Rhea exhaled. It was as close to perfect as she dared hope. Then something flickered at the edge of her vision. She turned her head. One of the orbs above the far side of the square had changed color. Instead of pale gold, it burned bluish white. The snow below it thickened, swirling faster. A small whirlpool of flakes spun down, landing in a concentrated patch on someone's hat. The man under it shouted, surprised, and laughed it off, brushing snow from his shoulders. It could have been nothing. But another orb shifted color. Then another. The line of snow over the river bent abruptly, drifting toward Market Row instead. The lanterns on the water hesitated in their path, bumping together as the current seemed to slow. "Rhea?" The mayor had appeared at her side, voice low. "Is that supposed to happen?" I don't think so," Rhea said. The snow began to move in strange patterns now, ignoring the direction of the wind. It gathered over certain parts of the square in dense clusters, leaving other areas almost clear. Rhea squinted. The densest patches of snow seemed to be forming over people. Not over their heads at random, but over small groups. Families, clusters of friends, older neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder. Wherever the snow thickened, the lanterns below on the river wobbled as if reacting to something. The line of light that had been so neat dissolved into knots and bunches. Some lanterns sped up, others slowed. A few turned in small circles, caught in invisible eddies. The musicians, halfway through a song, faltered again. One of the fiddlers lowered his bow, eyes on the sky. "Rhea, what did you do?" the mayor asked. Rhea's mouth was dry. "It's the snow spell," he said. "It's supposed to respond to people, the hearts together. I thought that meant it would make the snow fall when everyone felt festive." The warning from the book echoed in her memory. "If hearts are not together, do not attempt. Snow will fall in the wrong places." "Are they not together?" the mayor asked quietly, watching the uneven snowfall. In the square, a small argument had broken out near the cocoa stall. Someone complained about the new prices. Someone else snapped back that the bigger event cost more. 2 older women were fussing about the new metal rails, saying they'd like the old wooden stands better. A group of teenagers stood under one of the glowing orbs, filming themselves on a phone and shouting over the music. Their laughter didn't quite match the mood of the tune. The snow above each cluster reacted differently. Over the cocoa argument, it thickened into a curtain, as if trying to hide the scene. Over the teenagers, it blew sideways, refusing to land, as if it didn't know where to settle. Over a pair of neighbors who were quietly sharing a thermos and a blanket, it fell gently, evenly. "This is wrong," Rhea said. "I have to stop it." She ran back to the alley, expecting to find the chalk circle still faintly glowing. Instead, she found the snow from the spell had piled there in a perfect ring, white and dense. The dish of ice was cracked. The key was gone. The air in the alley felt crowded, as if someone invisible was standing very close. She tried to reverse the words she'd spoken. She tried rubbing the snow away with her boot. It clung to the ground as if glued. In the square, someone shouted again, louder. A lantern had tipped off its wooden base near the river's edge and fallen into the water without a flame. A child started crying. The line of lanterns downriver twisted, some of them drifting toward the shore, others stuck in little clusters. Above them, several of the orbs began to move on their lines, sliding back and forth like beads that had come loose. Their light brightened, dimmed, brightened again. The festival, which had been full of excited noise a moment ago, now buzzed with a different sort of energy. Confusion, little fear, a lot of questions. Rhea stepped out of the alley, heart pounding. Someone needed to take control of this. That someone was supposed to be her. She found the mayor by the stage, trying to calm a group of worried parents. "We should cut the orbs," the mayor said, as soon as she saw Rhea. "Turn them off, can you?" "Yes," Rhea said. Her hand shook as she reached for the control box. She flipped the main switch. Nothing happened. She fumbled with the wires, checking connections. The orbs stayed lit, some of them swinging gently in ways the wind couldn't explain. "It's the magic," Rhea said. "It's tangled in everything." The mayor took a breath, looking at the crowd, at the shifting snow, at the lanterns. "Rhea, you need to tell them," she said. "All of it." "Now?" Rhea whispered. "Yes," the mayor said. "Now, before this becomes a story that happens to them, instead of a story they're part of." Rhea climbed onto the low wooden stage, her stomach twisted. She'd spoken to crowds before, but never like this. "Everyone," she called, her voice catching on the first word. "Can I have your attention?" The musicians stopped. Conversations faltered. Faces turned toward her, some expectant, some annoyed, some uneasy. She took a breath and tried again. "I'm sorry," she said, and the word cut through the noise more cleanly than anything else she could have picked. The square quieted. "I'm the reason the snow is behaving like this," she said, "and the lights, and probably the lanterns too." A murmur rose. She pushed on. "When I came back to Evermarsh," she said, "I wanted to make the festival better, bigger. I thought if it looked impressive enough, people would feel proud to come from here. I didn't want our town to seem small and old-fashioned. So, I ordered these lights from the city and She hesitated. It felt ridiculous even as she prepared to say it. "I used some magic I didn't fully understand." There were a few disbelieving snorts, but most people just stared, snow on their hats, lantern light on their faces. "I used a spell from my grandmother's book to make the snow fall on command," Rhea said. "Only it doesn't just fall when you ask. It falls according to how we're feeling. When we're together, it's gentle. When we're not..." She gestured at the uneven flurries, the bare patches. "It gets confused. Like the lights, like the lanterns. Everything's tangled now, because I tried to arrange what shouldn't be arranged alone." She saw Lena near the front, the same Lena from the school, though older now, looking at her with wide eyes. "I thought I was fixing Christmas," Rhea said, "but I think I've only made it hollow on the inside and flashy on the outside, and it's pulling on things it shouldn't pull on. So I'm going to shut it all down. The magic lights, the spell, everything I added without asking you first." "How?" someone called. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I know I can't do it alone. I think that's the point." There was a pause. Snow fell in a thin line between her and the crowd, one of the only patches that looked normal. Then old Mr. Davis, who had carved more lantern bases than anyone in town, nodded. "Well," he said, loud enough for others to hear, "at least this time when the festival goes wrong, we know who to blame." A few people laughed, tension releasing a little. "And," the mayor prompted, giving him a look, "and we know who's going to help us fix it," he added, rolling his eyes. "Her and us, right?" He turned, sweeping his gaze around the square. "We've been grumbling since the decorations started going up," he said. "About the new stands, the fancy lights, the visitors from the city. But we still came. We still brought our lanterns. We still wanted the night. Maybe it's not the magic that's the problem. Maybe it's that we let someone else carry all of it." A woman near the front, scarf wrapped tight, lifted her chin. "What do you need us to do?" she called to Rhea. Rhea felt the fear in her chest. Make room for something else. "First," she said, "help me pull down these orbs. They're not listening to the switches anymore, but they're still hanging on wires. If we get them down, maybe they'll stop interfering." A trio of younger people, 2 teenagers and a student home for the holidays, stepped forward, gloves already out. "We can climb," one said. "We've been sneaking onto roofs since we were 10. Might as well do it with permission for once." Ladders appeared from nowhere, as they always did when Evermarsh needed to reach something high. People braced them against the buildings. The climbers went up, cautious but determined. They untied the lines, handing down the orbs one by one. On the ground, others set the glass spheres gently into crates. As each orb was lowered, its light dimmed, then went out completely. Rhea watched, heart in her throat. The sky above the square began to look like a normal winter sky again. Dark, open, snow slowly spreading into an even curtain. The lanterns on the river untangled as if relieved. The line of light reformed, not perfect but continuous. "Now the snow," Rhea said, more to herself than anyone. She walked back to the alley, this time with 3 people following. Lena, old Mr. Tavis, and the mayor. She pointed at the packed circle of spell snow. "I think this is the anchor," she said. "If we can break it, maybe the spell will release. Can't we just shovel it?" Lena asked. Rhea shook her head. "It's not normal snow. It doesn't melt right. It doesn't move unless it wants to." "So make it want to," the mayor said. "The book said it works when hearts are together, right? Maybe it will stop if we give it something honest instead of fear and show-off tricks." Rhea knelt by the circle. The snow there was very white and very still. She reached out and touched it. It was cold, but not in the biting way of ordinary snow. It felt waiting. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, thinking in the direction of whatever listened. "I used you to cover over what we didn't want to feel. I asked you to make us look better instead of helping us be better. That wasn't fair to you, or to the town. We'll try it the right way now, together. You can let go." Lena put her hand on the snow too, small fingers pressing into the surface. "We can decorate without you," she said. "Not because we don't want you, but because that's our job. You can just be snow." Mr. Tavis leaned on his walking stick. "We've been lazy," he admitted, "letting tradition do the work instead of picking up the hammer. No more of that." The mayor rested her hand on the circle last. "We'll make plenty of mistakes," she said, "but we'll make them out in the open, not in alleys." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the snow under their hands softened. It went from a solid ring to slush, then to cold water that seeped into the ground. The chalk marks disappeared. The air in the alley warmed by a breath. When they stepped back into the square, The snowfall had changed. It came down evenly now over everyone, over the cocoa stall, over the old rails and the new, over the imperfect decorations and the people holding them. The rest of the evening was improvised. With the orbs gone, the only lights were those from windows, torches, and lanterns. The musicians from the capital, freed from trying to compete with swirling snow, shifted to simpler tunes that people could hum along to. Children ran up and down the riverbank, shouting commentary about the lanterns as they passed. At some point, someone started hanging some of the glass orbs along the railing at ground level. They weren't glowing anymore, but in the flicker of real candles, they became mirrors, catching glimpses of faces and doubling the light. Rhea spent the night moving wherever she was needed. She fetched more candles. She held ladder bottoms. She tied rope around a broken lantern rail to keep it steady. Every few minutes, someone would grip her arm and say, "It's all right," or "Good call," or "Next year, ask earlier." And each small comment settled inside her like a stone in the right place. Near midnight, when the last of the lanterns disappeared around the bend in the river, the snow eased. The town clapped, not for a show, but for themselves. Rhea stood on the bridge, snow melting on her eyelashes, and watched the last flickers of light move away. Beside her, Lena tugged at her sleeve. "Do you think the winter guest came?" Lena asked. Rhea thought about the uneven snowfall, the way it had reacted to their moods. She thought about the spell book, her grandmother's neat handwriting, the warning about hearts together. "I think," Rhea said slowly, "that if the winter guest is real, they were probably watching to see whether we could stop trying to impress them and start impressing each other." Lena considered that. "Then I think they stayed," she said, "because this feels like a story they'd want to see again." Over the next weeks, people in Evermarsh told the tale of the year the Lantern Snow Festival went wrong in many different ways. In some tellings, the snow had almost buried the town under illusions. In others, the lights overhead had nearly fallen and shattered. But in all versions, one detail stayed the same. The moment when the festival stopped being something arranged for the town and became something the town did together. Rhea kept her job as festival coordinator. The mayor insisted. But the next year, when preparations began, Rhea's first task was not to order new equipment or study spell books. It was to call a meeting in the town hall and ask, "What do you want to do this time?" She listened as people suggested ideas, some good, some wild, some impossible. She wrote them all down carefully. They did use a little magic now and then. A charm to keep the lantern candles from blowing out in the wind. A whispered line from her grandmother's book to encourage the snow to hold off for one more hour or start 5 minutes early. But only after they had done their part. Built stands, painted jars, practiced songs, made room for each other. The glass orbs stayed in Evermarsh. They were no longer hung above the square. Instead, they stood along the riverbank, holding candles on festival nights. If you looked closely into them, you could sometimes see not just your own face, the faintest outline of someone else's. A figure in a cloak, a stranger smiling, a presence at the edge of the crowd. People said that was the winter guest checking their work. Or maybe it was only the reflection of all of them together, standing shoulder to shoulder in the snow, making their own light.